Did you know that whether you like it or not, there is a story, quite possibly, that is hiding behind a belief or hiding behind a reason why you don't do something, a reason why you do something, a reason why you say certain things, a reason why you choose certain things over others. A lot of the time when we do a little bit of digging, a little bit of introspection, we find out that there's actually a childhood story that's behind there. And here's the really powerful thing. That childhood story is not just hiding behind that belief, but that childhood story is something that has caused unprocessed negative emotions and feelings within us that still ripple into our adult lives. And when we think about that young version of ourselves, we created a belief in that moment when that thing happened that still, even today, no matter where we are, is still driving the person that we show up as in the world. I have a story like this, and I'd like to share it with you. When I was a little girl in primary school, I was fairly tiny. And some people might even say I'm still quite tiny now. But then I like to think I was a lot tinier than this, obviously, because I was a kid, because I was a child. But it was cross-country day. I think it was actually athletics day. Yes, not cross-country. So short distance instead of long distance running. And as part of our athletics uniform, we used to have these vests, and not vest as in French like a jacket, but a vest. So a sleeveless top that we used to wear. And because that top was sleeveless and mine wasn't quite to size, it literally just hung on me in a very breezy way. So my little lanky arms were sticking out. And it used to make me feel so embarrassed about my body putting that on. Yes, I used to enjoy athletics. I used to enjoy running. I enjoyed sports. But putting that on made me so conscious about how tiny I was, about how I felt like my body was so late at developing compared to other children, and how I felt like that made me unpretty or unattractive. Especially at a time when I was starting to recognize that there is something like being attractive in the world, if we can call it that. And so it was cross-country day, and I was getting ready to run, but I could just feel that there were all of these voices in my head that were telling me that, oh, I looked horrible, and it was affecting my self-esteem, translating into my performance on the day. So even as I stepped up and I got ready with my age group to run the race, I could feel my body just cringe, and I could feel that I didn't want to do this because I felt as if everyone was looking at me and laughing at my legs and how tiny they were and how my knees stuck out, or whatever it was that I was feeling at the time, and it was affecting my confidence. But really, one of the most incredible things happened on that very same day as I stepped up onto the grass to take my run. One of the newest teachers at the school, who went by the name Miss van der Merwe or Miss van der Merwe, stepped up, and I could tell that she saw me, but she didn't see me in the way that people generally see other people. Excuse me, the story always gets me, but she saw me in a very different way, and she stood closer to me. She got a bit close to me, and she said to me, "Don't worry about it. You know what? Dynamite comes in small packages." And I don't actually even remember what else was involved in the conversation, what else I said to her about how I felt or how I looked. I don't remember everything else that she said, because she might have said so many other things. But I just remember that one line. And here's the funny part. I didn't understand what that meant. I didn't even know what dynamite was at the time. I just remember that she said that phrase to me, and then I went out to run. I think my confidence was still shot. I still wasn't feeling too courageous. But years down the line, when that saying or that phrase came back and I started to understand and have more context around it, it was a beautiful full circle moment for me because it helped me to remember that in that moment when I felt so small and the world had been constantly telling me growing up how tiny and small and ineffective and irrelevant I was because of my smallness. And my smallness was a big part of my body shaming journey, or the journey that I had to unlearn around how I felt about my body. And when she said that, and just that phrase, having used it in relation to me for the very first time, helped me to realize that it is not my smallness that works against me. It's how I perceive it. And when she said dynamite comes in small packages, I think I realized that she was saying that there's so much more to me. There's so much more to me than just that smallness that I perceive. But the impact that I have the potential to make is profound. And as we start off this podcast episode, I would like to just remind you, whatever your unlearning journey is right now, just know that dynamite comes in the package that you are in. Whatever that package is, that when you think about your childhood story, you go straight there. Whatever it is for you, I want you to just remember that that situation, that moment, that feeling, that label, that discrimination that was put on you has got nothing, absolutely nothing to do with the impact you're going to make. And if it does have something to do with the impact you're going to make, it's that it's actually going to be the thing that propels you to make the biggest difference. Today, one of the biggest feedback points I get from clients is, oh my goodness, Zanele, when you stepped onto the stage, I said, oh, she's so tiny, she's so small. What can she say to us that we don't know? I actually had a client say this to my face once, and it actually happens all the time now. And still, I get reminded of that dynamite comes in small packages phrase. So, welcome to the Unlearners podcast, my beautiful unlearner. The Unlearners. Change. Learn, change. The Unlearn. I think if you take one courageous step at a time, it's going to be such the Unlearn. Learn, change, grow. That story is just one of those things for me. And I'd like you, as we start this episode, to call into mind whatever story it is that you carry from childhood. I once had a beautiful experience with a colleague of mine who shared a story about when he was in school. He had an experience where the teacher called him to the board to write something, not with the intention of teaching him or supporting him, but with the intention of making him feel small, of making him look silly and making him look incompetent in front of the entire class. So much so that apparently this teacher even laughed at him and encouraged the other children to do so as well. And I remember when I heard that story, I was so crushed. And what crushed me even more is that when he told that story, you could hear his voice shake. And he was telling that story as a way of pointing out how one of his deepest beliefs that show up now, I'm talking about someone who is well over 50 years old, but he was sharing so authentically, so vulnerably, how this particular instance and occurrence still dictated how he showed up, his value, how he was consistently procrastinating, as a mentor of mine, Denise Duffield Thomas, says, always stacking up the degrees and the diplomas and the masters, just so he could appear to be someone who is competent in his space, or because one day a teacher, especially in his youth, a teacher or anyone, it can be anyone really, planted the seed of a belief in him. And that's what today's episode is about. Today's episode is about helping us to raise our self-awareness, but also self-manage around some of those deep-seated beliefs that started off or were reinforced in childhood. Now, you may have heard about the work that we're doing at the Unlearning Children Foundation, which is my baby. You know that, you might know this, but when I started off my career as a professional, I started off in primary school teaching, and this was what I did my undergrad in. So I absolutely enjoyed this part of my life. And as a team, one of the things that we want to do is we want to help children, because we understand that school is the place where some of our deepest beliefs get created, but also where they get reinforced. And when a child's mind is so fertile, it's so important that mental health becomes something that children are taught, but also they get access to that support so that those children can relearn what it means to show up in the world. And if you are passionate about something similar, please join us either as a volunteer or support us in the Unlearning Children Foundation. You can find all of our information at theunlearners.com. That's our website. You can get all the juice about our foundation and how you can support and work with us, because this theme around unlearning childhood stories or challenging these childhood stories comes from there. It really comes from this need for children to get that adequate support, because at the end of the day, some children choose to end their lives because of this constant belief that they can't seem to unlearn, they can't seem to unravel. And then they turn into adults like you and I. If they don't choose to kill themselves or end their lives, they turn into adults like you and I who struggle on a day-to-day with deep-seated beliefs that influence how we learn and change and grow, because we didn't process them, because we weren't able to unlearn them. And I apologize if this episode has triggered anything unnecessarily. Please do forgive me. I should have put a trigger warning in the beginning, but I encourage, if this is getting a bit too much for you, that you stop the episode and you do what you need to do before you come back in, if you do. So let's have this conversation then. Let's talk a little bit about where these beliefs come from, but also how beliefs are reinforced. Let's start with where they come from. Now, you've thought about your particular childhood memory or particular childhood experience, and I want you to narrow it down to an experience. So one day I was on the soccer field and I tried to score and it didn't quite work, and I tried a few times and then all my friends laughed at me. Or one day I was sitting with my grandfather and this and this and this happened, or whatever it is. I'd like you to narrow it down to the belief. Now, here's the interesting thing about the human brain. The human brain will remember experiences a lot better than we will remember things like dates. But here's the better part, or the more exciting part, is not just regular experiences, but the experiences that are seeped or soaked in emotion are the experiences that we remember the best. And we won't remember what time it might have been, but we will remember how we felt in that moment. And because of that deep emotional connection in that experience, we will remember some of those details even better. So if someone asks you, what did you eat for lunch on Saturday last week? You may not remember that, unless while you were eating lunch, somebody walked in and did something that really excited you, and you could almost still taste your lunch while you had that experience. Or someone walked in and they did something that traumatized you. You might remember that a little bit better because there's that emotional connection there. And that's something that's really important to remember when we think about how we learn, how we retain information as human beings. The more we can create an emotional connection around our learning, around our engagements, around customer experience, the better off we will be at retaining some of that information that we're bringing in. So that's the first thing. And that's the reason why some of those memories will stick around for a very long time. But here's something that I find really interesting, is that a belief could be formed in a range of different ways. And we'll talk about some of the ways that they're reinforced. But one of the ways that beliefs are created is in that deep emotional moment. Because let me take you back to my example. When I had that experience, one of the deep beliefs or choices that I made, so you make a choice in that moment that, I am never again going to trust this type of person, or I'm never going to walk in front of my friends in my bathing suit again, or whatever it is. It's a decision moment that you step into at that time, and it's all formed around, I'm not going to ever step out in my underwear in front of my friends again because I don't look so great, or because they will laugh at me because I don't look like them, or whatever it is. So it's usually associated with the deep decision in that moment. So let's look at a few different ways that these childhood beliefs, or just any kind of deep beliefs and stories, get reinforced or start off in our lives. There's 4 different ones, and I'd like you to think about your deepest beliefs. They can be your beliefs around intimacy, your beliefs around money, they can be your beliefs around family, around work. Whatever it is, think about an area of your life either that triggers you in a positive way or triggers you in a less empowering way. The first way that different beliefs are reinforced and hardwired, you can use that term as well, hardwired in the brain. That just means that you create a neural pathway or neural pathways that are strong and consistently fired, and they almost become defaults. That's basically what hardwired means. So the first way is that they are first mentioned beliefs. Now, when something was the first idea or the first position you heard or were exposed to around a subject, there's a very good chance that this particular thing will form a deep belief in you. It's almost like that primary bias or that prime bias when something is of first mention. So you might find, for example, that the first time you learned about working or about jobs, you were told that, oh, my love, work is scarce and you must just be grateful for what you're getting and just suck it up. You don't have to enjoy it. And because that was the first message you started to hear and internalize about work, it ends up forming a belief and forming some of your deepest beliefs around that subject. So that's the first mention. And then the second one is when the beliefs or the particular idea is repeated consistently. And we know the power of consistency when it comes to the brain. Now, this is when there's consistency or ongoing repetition and a thought starts to hardwire, but it hardwires even faster than something that isn't. And that's because you're getting that chemical surge, an electrical surge, consistently running that same path. And because of that, the brain wants to make it easier for you to run that process or that thought process, so it hardwires. So the more that you get told that the story about sucking it up at your career and that it shouldn't fulfill you, that belief then starts to get reinforced, and it gets reinforced over any other beliefs about work because it's just been repeated consistently over and over again. So that's the second way that beliefs are hardwired. The first one was first mention, and the second one is when they are repeated. The very third one then is it's said by people that we trust. And this one for me is possibly the most hurtful. Now, when people whose opinions and ideas that we hold very, very dear because we care about them and they play a really pivotal role in our lives, they're received quite differently by us. We receive those ideas very, very differently. It's almost as if those ideas have been introduced to us and they land on fertile soil because we care or we esteem this person so highly. So if it was your dad, your mother, your best friend who made that comment about work and about careers, it's got a higher chance of actually sticking in your brain compared to maybe the lady at the grocery store that you don't know, or the male person, for example. There's a big difference there. So that's when it's said by people that we trust. And then the very last way that beliefs can hardwire, and there are other ways over and above these 4, but these 4 I find in the work that we do around coaching executives, coaching organizations, coaching professionals, are some of the ones that come up most frequently. The fourth one is there are no other contrary beliefs. And this is that bias around the only. When something is not contradicted, this is what we find. So the way to think about no contrary beliefs is that very few words or even occurrences that contradicted what you already thought are showing up in that situation, especially when you're a child, because you're hearing so many different things for the very first time. And when nothing else that's different shows up, then you've got a situation there of no contrary beliefs coming in to reinforce to build or support a particular belief. So if 80% of the time the conversation around work was that you just take what you got and you sucked it up, then that thought wins more brain real estate than a thought that might say, for example, you can enjoy what you love, do the work that you love, and money will follow, which I don't necessarily believe. But, there's a bunch of different things there, or different beliefs that could have been reinforced. But because nothing else came up, that's all you knew. That was the belief that you started to build. So to go through the 4 again one more time. The first one was first mention. Of course, that was the first one. First mention. The second one is that those beliefs get repeated consistently. You keep hearing that same story. The third one is that it was said by people that you trust. The very last one is that there were no contrary beliefs, or little, very, very little, if any, contrary beliefs that showed up in your sphere or in your space and context at the time.
Just imagine taking 3 days away from the noise of everyday life and deadlines, and just taking 3 glorious days in the mountains of the Drakensberg. Just you and your girls at the Champagne Sports Resort in the Drakensberg this November. Yes, from the 24th to the 26th of November, our 3-day transformation retreat, the UnLearning experience, is happening to support you as you change. So if you know you're someone who is getting ready to start 2024 strong, really want to take stock and to plan for an amazing year, then this is your opportunity to do that. Get your ticket now, because we only got 80 tickets left, and then they're all done. And our tickets include 3 different ticket levels, so you can choose the ticket type that is right for you and your people. Be sure to join us, because not only is this a phenomenal transformation experience, but it's also made up of enticing masterclasses, really, really juicy and inspiring talks, along with networking opportunities and time for you to be with you alone so you can reflect. Be sure to get your ticket from theunlearners.com website, and we will see you this November.
Now, I'd like you to ask yourself, as you think about your story, that story that you started off thinking about, I'd like you to ask yourself, how do I believe this particular story has hardwired the belief? Because a belief, in essence, is a story that you just keep telling yourself about your capacity, about the world, about who you are, about who other people are, about how the world relates to itself. So ask yourself, of these 4, which is the one that feels most like it's the closest to how my particular belief and story has reinforced itself? Now, I'll use myself as an example to help you to understand, but when I think about my particular unlearning journey with the story and Miss van der Merwe, I think for me it was that it was said by people that I trusted. I grew up with family members and friends of family members and adults that were uncles or aunts or whatever it was that were close in my space, consistently telling me that I wasn't girly enough, or I was extremely tiny, or they would use the word thin. And I think this is another conversation for another day, and I'd love to have this conversation with a guest, but we often think that only a certain body type can be shamed. But I think all of us have a story around being body shamed. And that for me is always so significant, because some of us go, oh no, but you were thin. Surely you were not body shamed. But that's the thing. And I think we don't understand it unless we are on the other side of the grass, right? So anyway, that's another story. So thinking about where it came from, and that for me, I think is definitely one of them. It was said by people that I trusted, but also it was repeated constantly. I would hear it almost every single day about how I wasn't big enough, how my arms could be bigger, about how my knees were knobbly, and how my arms were just so tiny and I just wasn't growing, and how I stopped at 12 years old and never got any further, which is something my father would say consistently. And I don't think he meant any harm by it. I adore him. But when you hear something consistently and with your child mind, you receive it very differently from an adult who may be a lot more self-aware and may have the tools to self-manage. And that's why I think as we near the end of this episode, it's so important for us to protect that space of how the child mind receives and builds its beliefs. Because we're working with such fertile soil as children, it's so important that if you've got a child in your life, that you have access to working with children in any way, that you allow them to build some of these really empowering beliefs about themselves and about who they can be. And the other side of that then is almost reparenting yourself. Now, not in the psychological manner, because I'm not in a position to give advice on that. But the reparenting that I'm talking about is be the parent that you didn't have. Be the parent that you feel really would have supported you. So if you feel like words like, I love you, you're doing well, I'm so proud of you, you are fantastic, you're beautiful, your body is just the way that it should be. Whatever phrases and affirmations you feel should have been said to you, say them to yourself now and give yourself the healing and allow the unlearning that you believe needs to happen so that those childhood stories no longer hold you back, but they help you to reframe who you are and how you show up now, because you deserve to show the world who you are. The world needs you. You are carrying something that is so valuable. And that's why for me, it's so hurtful when young people have been introduced to some really disempowering beliefs and then choose to end their lives. And in that way, that belief has stolen and the impact that that young person could have had on the world. And I want to just encourage you once again, before we close off, if you do want to support the work that the Unlearning Children Foundation does, it would be amazing. It would be truly amazing to have you support us and help us support children across schools in Africa who really could use some of those tools and don't have access to some of those tools ordinarily around how to manage their mental health so that they don't have to turn to suicide. Okay, so here's how I want to then close this off so that you're not just building self-awareness, but you also have a tool for self-management. If you know me, you know how practical I like to be and how I want to make sure that these episodes are not just ways of you going, oh, I understand, or oh, that makes sense, but also they're ways for you to go, okay, what do I do now? What is my unlearning journey actually going to be going forward? Okay, so I'd like you to take out your journal, and without overthinking, I want you to ask yourself the following questions. Whether you are doing this in an actual paper, physical journal, or you're doing it on a device, that's perfectly fine. Either one, whichever you're comfortable with, is perfectly fine. Now you're going to ask yourself the following questions. The first one, what did I learn from those who raised me? About, and you can list a few topics here. You can really do anything. What I learned about work, what I learned about intimacy, what I learned about the world, what I learned about other people, what I learned about money, what I learned about my mental health, what I learned about spirituality. Feel free to really use, and you can use the Wheel of Life. If you go onto the internet, just find the Wheel of Life and use those topics to ask yourself what you were taught. What were some of the beliefs that were reinforced, sometimes without you even knowing it, around those topics? And then the second question I'd like you to ask yourself is, which of those beliefs do I still carry? Out of all the beliefs that I've listed, possibly if one of the beliefs that you listed there was, I'm not worthy of love, or I'm not beautiful, I'm not attractive, or I don't know how to manage money, money doesn't grow on trees, or whatever it is, ask yourself, which of those beliefs do you still carry? And how are you going to know that? You're going to know when you read the belief. There's an energy there. And if you'd like to, I'd encourage you to put your hand on your tummy or on your gut and feel into it. If you read it and you get a sense that that belief doesn't resonate, another thing you can try is put your hand on your heart and listen to the beating of your heart as you read each belief. And you will know from your intuition that you have whether that belief still resonates with you or not. And then maybe put a little asterisk or a little star next to each and every belief that you feel like, you know what, I'm still working on this one. This one I haven't released yet. I haven't unlearned this one quite as yet. And just put an asterisk. And remember, we're doing this with a sense of curiosity and without judgment. So just raise your awareness, because this is how the unlearning process is going to start and unravel. When you're aware of it, then you can go into situations in the future and you can notice when it comes up. And maybe you're about to buy something at the store that your child needs. And you can be like, oh my goodness, I hear that voice. It's that belief from when I was 12 years old and I'd walked into the shop with my grandmother and she turned to me and said, put that down, or whatever it is. So just that beautiful awareness is enough. Let the awareness be enough. Don't rush yourself to make tangible, physical, trackable progress. Just let the awareness be enough. Then the very last question I'd like you to ask yourself, this is almost, it's just one question. In what ways have those beliefs manifested themselves in my life? Now, this is a really, really juicy one. In other words, what tangible clues exist in my life that show me that I believe these things? These can be things like actions, words, habits, thoughts, or even emotions and what they've brought about in your life. So, for example, if the belief that I have is that I don't deserve nice things because one day I went to the store with my grandmother and I said, Grandmother, I really, really want this toy. And she smacked my hand and said, hey, put that down. And so I put it down. And now the belief that I have is that I don't deserve to spoil myself. I don't deserve nice things. So ask yourself, in what ways have those beliefs, or that particular belief, in what ways has it manifested itself in your life? What are some of the actions that you now take? Maybe you rarely ever let your children have something that they enjoy, or you rarely ever let yourself purchase or buy something that you really, really like. What words do you use? Certain words like, who do you think I am? I can't afford that. We don't have money for that, or whatever it is. What words are you using? What habits do you have? But also, what thoughts do you have as well, to show that that belief is still running rampant inside you without you even knowing it? Because going back to where we started as we close off, unless we give ourselves an opportunity to let go of these beliefs, they are always going to be there, informing the decisions that we make, the words that we speak over and over and over again. Interesting research at Stanford University, and you might have heard me share this before because it's such an interesting piece of research, shows that of the 60,000 thoughts that we think as human beings on average, 90% of them are repetitive. We're just showing up as the same person over and over again, and sometimes we don't even realize it. And that for me is really, really powerful and shows the power of deep-seated beliefs. And when we don't raise awareness, we will keep showing up for what we think is 60 years when it's actually 20 years, 3 times over and over and over again, until the day that we no longer exist as the person we are right now in this lifetime. So I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that, to let the self-awareness be enough, and then step forward into what that means. So really excited about the potential of this episode and how it can support you going forward, because I think that there is so much value in looking that story in the face and going, you have no more power over me, but this is what I've learned from you. So thank you for your lessons. I now move forward as the person that I'm choosing to become in this moment. And then acknowledging, remember we spoke about reparenting that beautiful child who just needed something, who needed to feel a certain emotion. It might have been that you needed to just feel safe. Maybe you needed to feel loved. Maybe you needed to feel seen. You needed to feel heard. Whatever it is, give yourself that now. Give yourself an opportunity to be heard, seen, loved, and appreciated, or whatever it is, now where you are, because you deserve nothing less than that. And I always believe that the children we used to be are walking around with us or in us. So your inner child is very much alive and always looking at the adult version of you to support them. And that's my theory, and I'm sticking to it. Thank you so much, my beautiful unlearner, for listening to this episode of the Unlearners podcast. It has been amazing to support you on this journey. Let us know how you found this episode. Was this episode good? Was it helpful? What was your favorite part of this episode? But also, if you feel like sharing, send me a message on Instagram. What was your big and highly influential childhood story that you are reframing, rethinking, unlearning right now? And what's that journey like? I love hearing about that stuff. So please do share a message, share in the comments of this particular podcast. And I can't wait to read and hear from you as well. All of the best with that journey. Sending you lots and lots of love. It's been me, myself, Zanele Njapa, the unlearning lady, saying goodbye, and I will see you on the next episode of the Unlearners podcast. Bye for now. The Unlearners. Learn, change, the unlearn. I think if you take one courageous step at a time, it's going to be such the unlearn. Learn, change, grow.